And now that we are done talking about the UFC 305 main event between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya, we will talk about the rest of the card because this main card is very, very good. We've got an elite level flyweight fight and a plethora of other big time matchups to discuss and talk about some fights on the prelims that are sure to deliver some goods. Let's get into it right now, and we start with the co-main event, Kai Kara France versus former title challenger Steve Erceg. Don't blink is Kai Kara France's nickname, and I think that's the word, or the phrase I should say, to describe this flyweight fight. Don't blink when Kai Kara France and Steve Erceg step in here for the co-main event of UFC 305. This will be the first time that we've seen KKF fight since June of last year, and he has lost 2 straight fights, but look at who it's against, right? In July of 2022, he loses to former champion Brandon Moreno. And in June of last year, he loses a razor-close split decision to Amir Albazi, who we also have not seen fight since that night. So Kai's coming in here looking to get his first victory since March of 2022 when he beat Askar Askarov, who is no longer in the UFC. So his last victory over someone in the promotion actually dates back to December of 2021 when he fought Cody Garbrandt. So hasn't been very active over the last couple of years for Kai Kara France. Only one fight in 2023, and this is his first fight of 2024, but it is a huge opportunity because he's fighting newcomer Steve Erceg, who in what was his 4th UFC fight, if I'm not mistaken, was fighting for a UFC championship. Steve Erceg debuted in the UFC in June of 2023, and by the time May 4th of 2024 rolled around, he was literally fighting Alexandre Pantoja for an undisputed title. Unprecedented run that he had went on, but during that 3-fight win streak, 2 of his opponents, David Dvorak and Matt Schnell, were both ranked. He had a huge knockout against Matt Schnell 26 seconds into the second round of their fight last March. Turned it around 2 months later and went the full 25 minutes with one of the best fighters in the organization right now, Alexandre Pantoja. Really one of the longest reigning and longest defending champions that we have in the promotion is Pantoja, and he went the distance on 2 months' notice. It was a really, really high-level competitive fight. Steve Erceg, the Astro Boy, known for his power in his hands, but really he's a well-rounded guy. He has more submissions to his name than knockouts, but we haven't seen him utilize too much of that skill set so far through 4 UFC fights. Will he use it here against Kai Kara France? We know that KKF can bang. He has power in his hands. Just see that knockout that he had against Cody Garbrandt and others that have come before that. He's finished 14 of his 24 victories, been finished in 6 of his 11 losses. The guy doesn't know what a boring fight is. And in that fight with Albazi last June, you got to see that there really is some promise for Kara France. He really can make his way to a title fight and potentially even knock on the door of becoming a champion. This fight right here will go a long way in doing so because he could end a 2-fight losing streak and get a big stamp of approval by the UFC brass by defeating someone who just fought for a title in May. Dare I say, maybe with a wide open division right now, being that Muhammad Mokaev and Manel Kape had that crazy fallout from UFC 304, Kai Kara France could step right in for a title fight at the end of the year if he beats Steve Erceg here. And maybe it's more of a Monday conversation, but if you just look at the rest of the top 5 of this division, Royval scheduled to fight number 5 ranked Tatsuro Taira. Brandon Moreno said he's taking the rest of this year off, looking to just take a break for a little bit. And Amir Albazi is the only other guy there sitting at number 3, but he has not fought since that date back in June. I believe he had an injury that kind of kept him out of the title picture. Now, being that he's been removed for 14 months, can he just come right back in and fight for the belt against Pantoja? I guess he could. Maybe KKF gets the winner of that fight. Maybe KKF with a victory jumps right in for a title shot. And of course, if Steve Erceg, who sits currently at number 7 in the division, if he gets a victory here, he launches himself for the first time into the top 5, but maybe for the second time to a title fight. We've got a really fun fight in the featured bout in the lightweight division as the number 5 ranked Mateusz Gamrot is taking on the 11th ranked Dan the Hangman Hooker. This is a fun one that kind of came out of nowhere. For Gamrot, the only loss that he's had dating back to April of 2021 is against Beneil Dariush. Outside of that, he is 7-1 since then. The only loss before then was in October of 2020 in his UFC debut against Guram Kutateladze in a close split decision loss. And look at the resume that he has stacked up over this time. He beat Arman Tsarukyan in one of the highest level fights of 2022. He beat Jalen Turner. He beat Rafael Fiziev, albeit there was a knee injury in that one. And he's coming off of a victory at UFC 299 in March over former champion Rafael dos Anjos. He's right there in the running for a championship behind only Arman Tsarukyan. You can argue that Arman should have won that fight in 2022. I tend to lean on the side that Arman won. But regardless, Gamrot is doing what he's supposed to do. He's accepting fights against big name fighters and beating them outside of that Dariush loss in October of 22. And for Dan Hooker, he was on a period of time from June of 2020 to March of 2022 where he had lost 4 of his 5 fights, having only beaten Nasrat Haqparast. But if you want to dig into that losing stretch, it was to Dustin Poirier, it was to Michael Chandler in his debut, it was to the now best fighter in the world, Islam Makhachev, and it was to Arnold Allen down a weight class at 145, which how Dan Hooker ever made 145 blows my mind. But since returning to 155, he's 2-0 with a finish over Claudio Puelles in 2022 and a split decision over Jalen Turner last July. So now he's returning for the first time in over 13 months to now face a top 5 dangerous opponent in Mateusz Gamrot, who's known for his chain wrestling, someone who is relentless with his grappling. Dan Hooker hasn't fared the best with grapplers. Just see that fight with Islam Makhachev, but he has definitely gotten better in that department. So if he can keep this fight standing, if he can get up after being taken down, I think we're in for actually a very exciting fight, because Mateusz Gamrot doesn't like to get in to firefights. He doesn't like to stand and trade with people, especially someone as dangerous as Dan Hooker, who's finished 18 of his 23 victories. This is a big fight for Gamrot to hold his spot, kind of solidify himself as next man up behind Arman Tsarukyan. And for Dan Hooker, he can literally enter the top 5 of the lightweight division with a win here. Bam Bam and Biggie Boy. I bet you know what weight class these fighters are from. It is the heavyweight division top 15 clash between Tai Tuivasa and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Jairzinho coming off of a victory earlier this year where he finished Shamil Gaziev. He's won 2 of his last 3 fights. The only loss sandwiched in there is to a surging Jailton Almeida. But Bam Bam Tai Tuivasa has lost 4 straight fights, all 4 of them via finish. He's not won since February of 2022 when he knocked out Derek Lewis. This is a must-win fight for Tai Tuivasa. It's crazy to think that it's almost been 7 years since we saw Tai Tuivasa debut. Back in November of 2017, he came in and got a flying knee knockout, which led to him starting 3-0 in the UFC, including a victory over Andrei Arlovsky. Then he went on a 3-fight skid, losing to Junior Dos Santos, Blagoy Ivanov, and Sergey Spivak, who we just saw get a big victory last weekend. After that 3-fight skid, it seemed as though he had walked away from the UFC and or been released from the UFC. So he had a 1-year hiatus almost to the day. He lost to Spivak on October 5th of 2019, returned to the UFC on October 24th, 2020, no fights in between, and he knocks out Stefan Struve. That led him to go on a 5-fight knockout win streak, 3 of them in the first round, 2 in the second round. That included the aforementioned victory over Derek Lewis. And now he's lost 4 in a row. So it's been a crazy 7-year stretch for Tai Tuivasa. But if he loses a 5th in a row here, it may be the end of the road for him in the UFC. One of the most exciting, fun, well-liked people in this heavyweight division, going up against a very, very dangerous, heavy-hitting Jairzinho Rozenstruik. One of these guys is not making it out of the cage without having their ass hit the canvas. And we already talked about the recent stretch of things for Biggie Boy. He won a main event earlier this year. Then before that, he lost to Almeida. Before that, he beat Chris Daukaus. Before that, he was on a 2-fight win streak. He's had this weird kind of win one, lose one, win one, lose one, dating back to when he fought Francis Ngannou in May of 2020. Because prior to that, he started 4-0 in the UFC with 4 knockouts. That included knockouts of Andrei Arlovski and Alistair Overeem. We remember that legendary knockout in the 5th round. So not necessarily a must-win for Rozenstruik as it is for Tai Tuivasa, but still a big fight for him to kind of just solidify that he's still hanging around, that he's still a viable option and player in this heavyweight top 10. And we already talked about the stakes for Tai. He's got to win this fight. It's that simple. And as for the rest of the card, I just want to briefly mention some others that I think will have some pretty fun action to coincide with the names of the fight, and also some others that do have some rankings at stake. We'll start with the main card opener, Jingliang is taking on Carlos Prates. This is the first time we've seen the Leech since September of 2022. Remember that crazy fight week, UFC 279? I bet you do. Headlined by Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson, Khamzat Chimaev and Kevin Holland, Daniel Rodriguez, and the Leech, Jingliang. None of those names I just said were actually supposed to fight the other name that they were paired with. That's how crazy that fight week was. So we've not seen him since that split decision loss to D-Rod. Prior to that, he finished Muslim Salikov in July of 2022. During this hiatus that's near close to 24 months, Jingliang actually had a pretty severe neck injury. So I'm hoping we see him back at 100%. And I'm assuming he's going to be showing up wearing a pretty cool suit, if I'm not mistaken. Hopefully he's at the press conference. I'm recording this on Wednesday. But the 36-year-old Leech is looking to kind of right the wrongs, make up for lost time, if you will, for these past 2 years. But Carlos Prates is dangerous. The 2023 Contender Series alum has made good on his UFC career so far, going 2-0 in 2024 with knockouts over Trevin Giles and Charlie Radke. That was just in June, so he's coming back just 2 months later here, 19-6, 17 victories are by stoppage. Been finished 5 of his 6 losses. If this fight's boring, I don't know nothing about the UFC and nothing about mixed martial arts, because this screams high octane action. If it goes 15 minutes, it may just get the fight of the night. It could even go 4 minutes and 42 seconds and still be fight of the night. If this fight ends at the 4-minute and 42-second mark, I'm going to play the lottery. And there's a big fight in the women's flyweight division as the number 15 ranked Casey O'Neill will look to 1, hold her spot in the rankings, and 2, end her losing streak. She's lost 2 straight fights since coming back from her torn ACL. To do so, she'll have to beat the surging Luana Santos. Casey O'Neill at one point was 9-0 and a 4-0 record in the UFC with victories over Antonina Shevchenko and Roxanne Modafferi. That last victory was in February of 2022. After that Modafferi fight, she suffered a knee injury that sent her on a near 13, actually it was over a year. She fought February 2022, didn't return until March of 2023 against Jennifer Maia, albeit. That's a pretty tough out to come back from an ACL injury from, and she lost a decision. Then in December of last year, got submitted via armbar to Ariane Lipski in the second round. That fight, it did not look like the Casey O'Neill of old, which did kind of worry me a little bit. She's one of my favorite female fighters in the UFC. I was thinking prior to her knee injury when she was 4-0 with that victory over Roxanne, that she was going to be next up in this division, right? At that time, it was Casey, it was Aaron Blanchfield, it was Manon Fior. They were all coming up together. It was the new age, the new fresh blood of the women's flyweight division. And since then, we've seen Manon climb the highest, we've seen Blanchfield lose, and we've seen Casey go on a losing streak and have a bad injury. But I'm not giving up. She's only 26 years old. I think she can make her way back near the top 10 and put a winning stretch together. But this is no easy task here. Luana Santos is 8-1 with 5 finishes. She's 3-0 so far in the UFC with 2 finishes over Juliana Miller, an Ultimate Fighter victor, and a submission over Aria Agapova in July. Now, Luana is taking this fight on short notice, so that's something to keep in mind, right? She just fought a month ago. I think she just accepted this like 2 weeks ago at the time I'm recording this, maybe 3. Hell, it might have happened literally right after she got out of the cage with Agapova, and they just offered her that one because she got it done so quickly. This is a big opportunity for Santos to get a big win, launch herself into the rankings after just 4 UFC fights. The only loss in her career was a split decision in LFA to Jenna Bishop. That was when Luana would have only been 22 years old. Jenna Bishop's now in the PFL and made it to the semifinals before getting eliminated to Dakota Ditcheva. So this is a very, very legitimate threat here in the back half of the flyweight division. Casey O'Neill better be careful. And as for the rest of the card, just some fights that I think could be bangers. It could be Josh Kulabau and Ricardo Ramos, Jack Jenkins versus Herbert Burns, Tom Nolan versus Alex Reyes, and Song Kenan versus Ricky Glenn. This fight card is pretty stacked from top to bottom. It may not be the biggest names on the prelims, but if you look at the styles that are going to be clashing, they are all but made to have absolute potential in terms of fan-friendly fighting. So give me all of your thoughts and opinions and your predictions for UFC 305 in the comments below. Give me some of your best bets. Give me your parlays, everything in between. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. I recap the biggest results every single week. I preview the biggest storylines and what's at stake heading into every card, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at the BAJ MMA and follow on your favorite audio platforms such as Spotify and Apple. Podcast episodes released there every Friday and Monday. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you in the next video.